Well, joining us now live from London is Spiked Online Editor Tom Slater. Tom, thanks for joining us. I want to start with the fallout from the Glastonbury Music Festival. Obviously, that's all over the news in the UK after Death to the IDF was chanted by artist Bob Vylan. Just to remind viewers, here's what happened at the festival, and keep in mind, this was broadcast live by the BBC.
Free, free! Free, free! Free, free! Alright, but have you heard this one, though? Death, death to the IDF! 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 Death, death to the IDF!
So, Tom, just fill us in on the reaction in the UK, because I think the government have come out very upset about this. The BBC are in all sorts of trouble, and that's before we get to the artist in question. Just give us the latest on this.
No, there is wall-to-wall outrage and concern about this, rightly so. If you've got people chanting slogans like that to a packed audience of people at Glastonbury Festival, it does evoke some of the worst moments in human history, shall we say. The way in which this kind of anti-Israel bigotry has become so mainstream, so accepted. And Glastonbury, as you exactly rightly say, it's something like Wimbledon is broadcast across the BBC every single year. This is a kind of key cultural moment. And yet you've essentially got the BBC giving a platform to a form of woke anti-Israel bigotry, which is bordering on the deranged. So I can't imagine what it must be like for British Jews in this country at the moment, who can turn on their televisions watching Glastonbury of a Saturday afternoon and see people chanting to murder people who are defending the Jewish state from its Islamist enemies. It's absolutely sickening, but I can't say I'm anything more than shocked, but not surprised by where we've ended up with this.
And Tom, what does it say more broadly about the cultural issues now we've got in our society? I mean, whatever happened to going to a music festival just to enjoy the music? And bear in mind, this is supposed to be the so-called tolerant left who attends these sorts of festivals. But more broadly, what does it say?
I think it says that a lot of the kind of cultural elites, a lot of what passes for supposedly countercultural pop music and so on these days has just become completely lost to this new form of bigotry and intolerance. I don't think there's any two ways to say about that. People say, oh, he was chanting about the IDF. This is a trick that Hamas use, incidentally. They say that all civilians pretty much are fair game, but because of national service, therefore they're military targets. So we've got to recognise the scale of what we're dealing with here. And one of the things that I find so concerning about it is how kind of unthinking this is. On top of those chants, he also chanted, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," a call for the destruction of Israel and the ethnic cleansing of Jews, whether he realised it or not. And you've got people who, to be perfectly frank, probably haven't thought a hell of a lot about this issue, blithely singing along with that in their tens of thousands. So I think it shows just how deep this problem, this sickness in our society has become, and we really need to confront it. If watching tens of thousands of people on television chanting those slogans isn't enough to make us really take this issue seriously, I don't know what will.
I mean, if you were a Jew living in London, you'd be reconsidering whether it's a safe place to live. I want to show you a tweet by an Australian journalist, Latika Burke, who kind of got it right, but got it really wrong. She wrote, "Watch MAGA go nuts about this. This will be a huge story in the UK, possibly globally. Unbelievable to see this sort of speech glorified and cheered." So I agree with the last thing she said. It's unbelievable to see this sort of speech glorified and cheered. But for her to say, "Watch MAGA go nuts about this," this isn't a left versus right issue. This is an evil versus every decent person on the earth issue, is it not?
No, absolutely. And that's one thing that we've got to get abundantly clear in all of this. I mean, I understand that because of the way the kind of culture war pans out sometimes, it's for some reason become right-wing coded to want to stick up for Jews when they're facing this kind of intolerance, when they're facing the constant denunciation of Israel, when they're seeing people minimise the crimes committed against them. How that ended up being a right-wing coded position, I have absolutely no idea. The one thing she is also right about there, though, is politically, this is going to move a lot of people towards, in this country, towards the Reform Party. It wouldn't surprise me if those images showed up in a future party political broadcast. But again, this is not a political football. The stakes are much higher than that, absolutely.
I want to ask you about reform actually in a moment, but I just want to talk to you about migration, because last month Keir Starmer announced the toughest migration crackdown in a generation, promising to slash numbers and fix Britain's borders. This is what he said.
We risk becoming an island of strangers. that encourages some businesses to bring in lower-paid workers rather than invest in our young people. So, yes, I believe in this. I believe we need to reduce immigration significantly.
Well, gee, Tom, what a difference 6 weeks makes. He's now had a change of heart and claims that he deeply regrets his island of strangers comment. Does he want to fix migration or not?
I mean, this just completely explodes the idea that he believes in this, as he was saying there, but also that he believes in anything. I mean, that speech was a fascinating litmus test, I think, for Keir Starmer. He had to talk about the key issue for so many voters, the key issue that is turning so many people against his party as it presides over this horrendous situation of uncontrolled, illegal and legal migration. And as soon as he got a little bit of blowback, because people took over-the-top offence to one particular phrase, he's all of a sudden does an about turn. He goes from saying, I believe this over and over again, to saying in that interview with The Observer where this U-turn has appeared, that he didn't even really read the speech properly. So I think it shows that he doesn't take the biggest issue in the country seriously at all. And also I think it's a reminder, as many of us have suspected, that there's not really much this man believes in at all, apart from the fact he would quite like to continue to be Prime Minister. That seems to be it. So this is not the sort of person you want running your country, particularly at a very difficult time, shall we say, as this.
Tom, unfortunately, there's a lot of people just like that running a lot of countries at the moment, particularly in the West. You mentioned Reform Party. I want to ask you about Nigel Farage. He's outlined his plan for taking power, but he said in an article published in the UK Times, if I can't give young men a voice, wait till what comes after me. What does he mean by that, and does he have a point?
I mean, it is an interesting point because, as you're seeing, not just in the UK, US, I'm sure it's true in Australia as well, is that young men in particular are trending much more rightwards, it seems. There's a bit of a kind of split between the sexes on this. And I think he's making a very interesting point, which is to say it's not necessarily that it's all about him, but if a party like Reform cannot speak to those concerns, which the younger generations are twigging onto as much as anyone else, about questions of migration, multiculturalism, the way in which a country is changing without the people who are already here necessarily having a say in that, then people are going to start casting around for alternatives. And the alternatives could be more extreme, could be more genuinely unpleasant. So I think this is a point that Nigel Farage is trying to make a virtue out throughout his career, which is to say that if you don't deal with these things from what he would consider a centre-right position, then you can't really complain when something more extreme pops up. So whether or not it's true, whether or not it's all about him necessarily, I think he makes an interesting point about why you've got to listen to these concerns if you don't want them to curdle into something a little bit darker.
You know, it's interesting, Tom. I was just in London a couple of weeks ago and I had a taxi driver there say to me, I don't like Nigel Farage. He's really, really racist. Can't stand the bloke. But why do you think that he is starting to make ground?
I think it's a mix of things. Obviously, it's the crumbling of the two main parties has allowed this space for reform to come through, the way in which they've just completely imploded. I also think he's, unlike Keir Starmer, he's been pretty consistent on questions of the European Union, on immigration. That counts for a hell of a lot, particularly when immigration has become such a flashpoint issue. And he does just have that ability to connect with people. Maybe not your cab driver, Danica, but other people around the country. It's been striking in particular over the last few years how many kind of the younger generations are really becoming attached to him. I believe his TikTok following is bigger than all of the other MPs in the House of Commons combined. Not that everything is on social media, not that elections are won or lost there, but you see how things are moving, and it is in his direction. He's gone from a point of always being the kind of gadfly on the outside of politics to potentially being the leader of the largest party. So what a turnaround that would have been. Yeah,
well, I mean, that's where the young people are on TikTok. That's the generation you do want to target. I completely agree. Tom Slater, really great to speak with you. Thanks so much for joining us on the show this evening. Appreciate it.